Fat boys, that's it. That's all. Year is done. Now, I appreciate the patience. As many of you know, I had a really hectic break, so I didn't really necessarily have all the time in the world to do this, but a lot of traveling, so I'm about a week later than I'd like to be, but I think that's more than fine. Hopefully you still enjoy the recap. So we're going to do similar to what I did last year, except for hopefully half the time. I went on way too long last year. I tried to cut myself down with a little bit of a 4-point gimmick. We'll see how well it works. But ultimately, I'm going to go through the matchups of the last week and then in reverse order kind of go 10 through 1. So I'll do the bottom matchup, 9 and 10. Then I get the 10th person, 9th person, then the matchup. You see how it goes. Similar to last year, I will just jump in and put in the 5 and 6 spots so we know how we finished. I'll go back to our draft report cards. Spoiler alert, I'm pretty happy. I don't even know if I mentioned it, but do remember I got the worst score, a D-. Same with UB, and yet came back, won the championship. I'm going to try not to be an arrogant prick on this one. Hopefully I pull it off, but who cares? In our battle for the basement, I'll be honest with you, and this is not a shot on John, I don't think he really cared so much. It does make me think, and I know this league every year I say we should propose a few new rules. We don't tend to vote a lot on new rules, so I don't know if this would ever pass, but I don't mind the idea of like an ultimate last place consequence. It's just living so far apart. I don't really know how we'd like uphold it. I don't think it should be a financial one, but anyway, just because personally, I do like to pay attention to each matchup, but I fully understand that I'm not the norm here. And in this case, had John put out a better lineup, he would have had to make some ad drops, so maybe he felt like he didn't want to do that, because that, in some circles, is also seen as rude if you're taking away potential players for the money spot. So maybe he was just being polite. In this case, though, he actually did fall into a few good performances, including, we'll talk a little bit about each team after this, and he did have some bright spots, especially at wide receiver. Unfortunately, this result is kind of where John's season was. If we look at his record, obviously he just missed the playoffs, so finishing 10th is disappointing, but again, I don't know if he cared so much. The problem with him was injuries, and it was all year, so it might as well have been at the end, because Brian Thomas Jr. had a great season. Miami actually was also the defense 3 on the week. So B, you staved off 10th spot, you got 9th, and how you did it was, again, similar to your kind of magic this year. Baker was a huge component. He was the quarterback 3 on the week. You also had the running back 4 in Bijan. You had the tight end 5 in Kittle. And you had the kicker 5, which I don't know if you were banking on, but you sure had it. Your bench, we're going to talk about some of these people in just a minute when I go through each one of your teams. If you remember, that's how I'm going to frame this matchup, and then each of the teams in reverse order, how you finish. So I'm going to save that stuff for a few seconds. But all that to say, 131 is a great way to finish, and if you believe in fantasy karma, you're working towards next year. John, the other side of fantasy karma, maybe this is you just saying, I didn't want to ad drop, I wanted to save those players for those people, didn't want to be seen as a jerk. So maybe that's fantasy karma too. Who knows? As I said, we're going to do a little profile of each of the teams. We'll start with who finished 10th. So that's you, John. Unfortunately, as you see from your record, you did just barely miss out on the playoffs. Of course, we all kind of did. It was a very, very close league. In another world, another matchup, you'd have been fighting for top spot. But like I said, it was really injuries that cost you. Now, in the interest of not going the 35 minutes I went last year, no promises, but let's see. I want to try and be a little shorter. I have everyone's hero, everyone's villain, everyone's surprise, and then the reason why you're here. And for, realistically, your villains, we'll start there. It really was, it should have been your wide receivers that got you over the finish line, because I almost actually had them as your heroes. But if we take a look at your draft, obviously, looking at those top 3, they should have carried you all the way. And it's not like they all bombed. It's just Wilson, inconsistent offense. We can blame Rodgers as much as we can anyone else on that one. A.J. Brown, it was injuries. Evans did perform quite well, but he was your only one of these guys that stuck it in the top 12, Evans being the wide receiver 9 on the whole year. Laporte is an interesting case because he started off horrible. You dropped him. I picked him up, and then suddenly he went off, and actually he became part of Detroit's offense, but fully understand why you couldn't wait any longer. But I'd say here, the C.J. Stroud, massive underperformance, cost you huge this year. But then we start looking up. You get Kamara, great performance, but was injured. So the fact that you actually were not last the whole year is a testament to the moves you made and the starts you had. I'd say your steal, though, you're surprised Brian Thomas Jr. was amazing. He was the wide receiver 4 on the year. Chase Brown, again, though, if we take a look, Don't see him. Problem with the short bench. Something I'm going to advertise again. If we want to add an extra bench spot, I know a lot of people seem to love that, so it doesn't go through every year. But that's the downside, is we don't often get to keep our late draft. So for your hero, though, I don't want to be all negative here. I did actually put your late round. I really liked your late draft. I did think it helped you out. I just think too many busts. CJ, Javonte, Brown being hurt. You needed one or two studs, and you really just needed one or two anchors. And if you had that, I actually think you would have made top 6 and would have been something to contend with in the playoffs. Now, the real question, are you and Justin going to keep your names for other years? This league is not notorious for people keeping names for that long. Only a few of us ever have. So that is a big question heading into next year, because you don't really need to blow things up. You just need to find one or two more consistent people. B, in a very similar vein, you were quite close to making the playoffs. I know I'm going to say that for everyone that didn't, because everyone was like a game or two off heading into the last week or two. It just didn't work out your way. Then you had a bad cross, and here you are finishing up 9th. Now, taking a look at your roster, though, a lot of people here end up on the top lists, and actually some people that you look at as in people who had these people did quite well. You did have a few of them here. Now let's just take a look at your draft. Bijan being first, getting him all the way down at 6th ended up being a steal, because of all the running backs that could have gone early or were going early, Bijan's the only one that really didn't bust or get hurt. He did finish as the running back 4. Unfortunately for you, that was followed by a series of underperformances, whether it's because of Olave's injuries, DJ Moore, just that offense couldn't support him all year. He did have weeks he was phenomenal and weeks he was nothing. Harrison was a huge bust, and I think that's what really kind of cost you the most. These kind of mid-rounds, or early rounds, you really needed to pop off. Now, if we look later, George Kittle was a huge take at 6. He was the tight end 2 on the season, so obviously that was a bit of a steal. Followed again by Stevenson and Dax, who just didn't do a whole lot. Now, the guys near the end here actually did fine. Worthy and Njoku, inconsistent, but actually did finish in the top 12 for tight ends, but you didn't need him, so you ditched him. Chuba Hubbard, I think, is probably your best pickup of the year. He was certainly someone that helped you in those mid stages, even like the touchdown factory that was Westbrook Kine, but you needed consistency, and you just didn't have it. Week by week by week, you were always a threat, but it was always that injury or that underperformance. And sorry, I did mention the previous one, so now I forgot. Baker was obviously, I think, your best pickup of the year. He was the quarterback 4 in the year, which is freaking ridiculous. Really makes me think, how does he get drafted next year? I say it way too much, but it's because I love saying it, and I actually believe it. Consolation champion, only other person aside from the winner of the whole thing that actually finishes on a 2-game minimum win streak. So I guess congrats in that sense, Justin. Obviously, Chaz, this actually wasn't as bad. You were a little bit lower in the regular season. You fought your way up to 8. I'm sure you would have preferred it even higher, but maybe next year. So in terms of this one, though, I think, Chaz, you did have kind of an underperformance, something we're going to talk about with your team in terms of running back issues, but we'll get to those. You still had Neighbors, though, who went off. He was the wide receiver 2 randomly. This was a huge week for wide receivers, which I think we're going to see as we go forward. Justin, though, you did have a bit too much firepower. Kelsey was the tight end 3. You had the running back 1 in Jonathan Taylor, even though he didn't quite get in the end zone before he tossed one. It actually would have been worse. And you had the best scoring defense on the week. So 160 was a huge number. I'm sure you wished it was for a different final, but consolation final it was. It does round out our spots, and like I said, I've been in leagues where you get something for this, or at least a little bit of recognition. We're not one of them, so I'll just say congrats. Chaz, when we talk about your season, I don't even want to get cute with it. I think we know what your main villain is. Number 1 pick in the draft, CMC going down early, but then even Kupp getting hurt. You even drafted a handcuff, which was fantastic. It avoided the waiver wire, and then he got hurt. So injuries were certainly something that kind of crushed you. I would say that's your villain. Although I would also maybe throw out the fact that you kind of got stuck in this idea of a lot of players who did well enough week by week, but wouldn't always go off. But I'll get to that one in just a second. I'd say your hero was really your mid-rounds here. Neighbors was a great pick. Andrews ended up being a great pick, although both of them were just so volatile. Andrews started off the year horrible. You felt you couldn't drop him, and it's a good thing you didn't. He did end up as our tight end 5 on the year, and considering he scored most of his points in the second half, that actually worked out with you well. Neighbors was in the same. When he was on, he was on. He ended up as our wide receiver 7, which is actually quite exceptional for a rookie. Achane did pan out for you. He was the running back 6, considering his injuries, but the rest were kind of whiffs. And if we look at the team you ended up with, it's just a bit too similar to your draft team. So you did make some moves, maybe just not enough aggressively, because I think your wide receivers really, really did cost you. You took a few gambles. I mean, having Goff on the bench, Goff actually did much better overall than Murray, and I know you went back and forth a little bit there. Murray was our quarterback 10, whereas Goff was our quarterback 6. So again, I think there's another universe that exists where these injuries don't happen. A few of these moves go a different way, and you are certainly in the playoff hunt. It just was what it was this year. Justin, as I said, it's a weird congratulations, but congrats on the Constellation Championship. To be completely fair with you, when I was going through your team, it is actually kind of hard to figure out how this didn't go better for you. Your top guys were the top guys, and if we look at your draft, you had them all the way through. You would think Taylor would have been your number 1, but he actually wasn't. He was still fine, though. He was the running back 9, but Saquon Barkley, massive steal in the second round. We all passed on him. He was the running back 1. Kelsey did finish in the top 6 for tight ends overall in the year, even though he was kind of up and down. But Lamar Jackson in the 4th was our quarterback 1. Looking at those top 4, there are few other top 4s that can compare to that. The problem is the rest. And I think the issue is, again, with the short bench, you couldn't hang on to. I think your best wide receiver was actually all the way down in your 12th. That would have been a huge steal had you held on to him. He did end up being in the top 10 for wide receivers. He was the 10 overall, but had a good push later on in the season. I think sometimes we just fall in love with who we fall in love with. Allen was just super inconsistent. Same with Sutton. So they had weeks where they went off, but weeks where they certainly didn't. And I think timing was just your issue. You were someone who obviously scored a ton. You were our 3rd highest scoring team, but you did have the 4th hardest schedule. So I think that might be a way to put it, that you were putting up the points. Your just defense wasn't there. You were giving up the points too early. Even a glutton of riches here, because your backup quarterback was even in our top 10. He was the 8 overall. So another universe exists where just the stars aligned a little bit better. You were in the playoffs and you could have made a push. Unfortunately, just didn't go your way this year. All right, we're almost halfway through my breakdown, and I'm already tired of saying this, but I mean it legitimately every single time. A world exists where you are our champion this year, because if you look at your team, you did have depth in each position. So I'm going to be picky when I pick everything. I would say for your MVP, take a quick look at your draft. I'd say your mid-rounds here, 2, 3. Now, I would give it to 4. Trey McBride, actually, you did drop him, but he was our tight end 3, and I would love to make fun of you for that, but who you dropped him for was Brock Bowers, who was our tight end 1. So it's one of the rare times that you dropped a top 5 guy, and you should have. But for everybody else, I mean, Jalen Hurts, you would think he actually was a little bit higher, but he was only our quarterback 9, and I think that kind of hurt you a little bit. Kyren Williams, great starter, running back 7. So again, I think this is where we're at, where you had good guys, but you just maybe needed like the guy in a week, right? And I think obviously your villain, Breece Hall, huge bust. Not your fault on this one. I think it was a combination of the offense he was in and the situation. I was sitting next to you when you drafted him. I know you felt good and bad at the same time. We all kind of did. In terms of some steals, though, and this is where if we take a look, you did manage to hold on to some of them. I think one of your steals is obviously T. Higgins. That was great in the 8th. While he didn't necessarily place in our top 12, he was not healthy all year, and when in a per week basis, he was on one of the top kind of echelons for the year. Unfortunately, you couldn't hang it on to McConkey because he did finish in our top 12. However, you did jump on Jameson Williams and Bucky Irving, who didn't finish overall, but per week were killers. So again, if you kind of match all these up, there are winning teams every single week. I think the problem is you had a few guys like the Halls of the world that were doing just enough to stay in your starting lineup and didn't tank enough or get hurt so you could drop them. And that just kind of cost you. And that is being nitpicky, but again, you did make top 6. You did have a shot at the playoffs, so the margin of error was quite small. I should have mentioned this before, but I think we all know I just went straight to V and Horst because they had played their matchup the week before, so they're the only ones who didn't have a matchup in the final week. That's why I didn't cover the matchup first. You get it. Horst, I want to go to your team now because if you take a look, you did do a ton of moves, but your core did stay the same. Good couple pickups like Tracy Jr. To deal with some of the injury relationships you were dealing with. But if we look at your top 5, that's a pretty solid top 5. You got the 2 wide receivers, both end up in our top 5 overall. Jefferson was the number 2. Drake was the number 5, so huge pickups there. Josh Allen was our quarterback 3 on the year. Josh Jacobs was a number 5 running back. And Monty was on pace for it until he got hurt. He would have finished in the top 12. I don't know if anyone else in this draft can say their top 5 were actually the top 5 that they should have taken. Now, Monty getting hurt was huge. You did end up, like I say, replacing with the Giants running back, but that's a little bit inconsistent. And I think the biggest thing, 2 things didn't go your way. Number 1, your mid-rounds with some injuries. You had to drop, you had to add again. The other kind of thing that I keep saying over and over again, this idea of the short bench, you got to make moves. So you did lose most of these guys, but they weren't really worth you keeping. They weren't having phenomenal years. The second thing that really hurt you, you did actually have our high scoring, but our worst schedule. So that was your villain, was the fact that you were just up against it week after week after week. It's why you always felt that you had a shot at it, because you did. It's just, unfortunately, whatever it was, when people played you, they just went off. Now, it wasn't a massive difference if you look at the overall scores, but per week it did pick away at you, and I think it cost you a win here or there, which, when it comes down to a league that over and over again we say so competitive, so close, ultimately every win did matter. Our bronze medal match was over early and often. Unfortunately for you, Mark, you were a bit of a hit or miss team, and you kind of relied on your big dogs. Now, Henry showed up. He was the running back 3 on the week, but Chase didn't. I mean, 15's fine, but you're used to 25, 30 plus with this guy, and he wasn't in the top 5. No one else really was. Jonas Smith was obviously a great pickup for the year, which we'll talk about in a second, but he didn't help you. And even if you look at your bench, you could add up a few guys that could have been there, but ultimately you needed a few studs to go off, and they just didn't. But speaking of studs that went off, Ben had a phenomenal performance, had the QB and the tight end one. Tight end, I won't talk about it much in year end because you didn't draft him, but you did pick him up. It's probably the pickup of the year for you, at least, I think, because he ended up being the tight end 3 on the year. Now, the crazy part was he should have been tight end 1. He just never got touchdowns until this week. This is actually his first touchdown in the year. And yet, look at his receptions, look at his yardage. Like I said, tight end 3 on the year without touchdowns. I think that's pretty exceptional. Joe Burrow does end up, I'll talk about where he ends up on the year, but he was the quarterback 1 for the week, and the defense 4 in Seattle. So you had this one early. You could already plot what your winnings would look like and how you'd kind of want to celebrate, because I don't think you were biting your nails down to the wire on this one. Mark, you made it all the way. You had a great year. You were in the semis. You lost. You're in the bronze. You lost. So you have the weird distinction of being highest placed that didn't quite make it in. Even in the regular season, you can say the same thing. Sorry, pal. Anyway, it's hard for me to also evaluate your draft when you didn't necessarily do it. I don't know. You've never really said how much you interfere with Yahoo. Do you add and drop players or move them up and down, or do you let Yahoo sort it out? Either way, you can't mess with Yahoo. And number 1, they did give you Chase. Chase was by far the wide receiver 1 by 82 points on the next person. Henry was a phenomenal pick in round 2. He was the running back 3. Then things started to go a little off hinge. Adams didn't quite crack the top 12. In fact, no one else really did on anyone that you drafted except for Goff downstairs, but I don't think he lasted too long. He was your quarterback 6, by the way. And that is really where your issues happened. You did drop Goff. Richardson didn't pan out for you. And so quarterback was certainly a position that you really, really struggled with. I'd throw Debo on there as well as someone who just didn't produce like you thought they would, although you did get some value out of Aaron Jones. I think you're surprised. I don't know. I put Brian Robinson Jr. on there just because I think that's nice that, he was actually very startable. And at someone on the 10 spot that you could play occasionally, I think was quite helpful. Obviously, he wasn't a week-by-week stud by any stretch, but not so bad. And he didn't actually necessarily crack the top 12, but like I said, I would feel like in most cases he was worth a flex. You did end up with a great move. You took tight end Smith here. He finished as our tight end 4, so good pickup there. Worthy was a good pickup as well. So you were certainly in the mix. And like I said to pretty much everyone here, I mean, a few kind of points here or there, a few starts here or there. This goes a different way, but ultimately the no QB kind of weighed down on you, especially in some of these big weeks, the last few weeks of the playoffs. QBs went off and you didn't have one that did. It did end up mattering. To our favorite name of the year goes our bronze medal and the cash that comes with it. Ben, what I think is interesting with yours is if you take a look, CeeDee Lamb at the 2 was a bit of a stretch. I mean, some people had him here, some people had him way down, but I don't think there was any guarantees. And to be honest, when I get to my final video, the fact that there wasn't that many number 1 round picks that paid off, you might as well go for the guy you want. Now, Lamb was hurt, and if he was not hurt or had a functional quarterback, I do think he's a little higher. He ended up as the wide receiver 8, which is still not the end of the world. But actually, the last few guys I've talked about, the draft went really well. For you, I don't think it went well at all. Yahoo disagreed. It gave you an A, but Etienne, Puka Nacua, because of injuries, Ayuk, White, Diggs, these were not picks that helped you out in the end. And Burrow was obviously a massive one. I have him as your sleeper and possibly your hero as well, the key pickups. But Burrow, he was the quarterback too. No one else on here even scores close. We could also throw Tucker on that list. I don't know how many more years you're going to draft Tucker, but did this year kind of kill you on it? Because the problem is when you invest that much in a kicker and he's not doing well, he sticks around, but you still wouldn't even drop him. You wouldn't start him, but you wouldn't drop him. I think that's hilarious. McLovin was a great pickup. I mean, having him, he ended up with the wide receiver 6 spot. You did a great job trying to source your running backs through, getting Jerry Jeudy, again, someone who didn't quite crack the top 12, but was actually closer than most people think. You were dealing with injuries. You were dealing with some inconsistent play here. You know, you kept Chubb for a long time, even though we don't have an IR spot. I still think we should. Addison was someone that you hadn't dropped, but if we look at the pickups, I think it evens out. Ultimately, I'd say it's hard for me to say who your MVP is, but I gotta think, I mean, Burrow is certainly up there. But it's really your moves and how many of them you made. You were over 30 moves. There are some people who barely had any. So I would say that is not just your MVP, but how you ended up in the 3rd spot. It certainly was a lot of issues, had to deal with a lot of injuries, inconsistent plays, but you pushed through. In another world, again, just like everybody else, maybe you could have cracked the final and you put up a tough score in the final that obvious, or in the bronze here would have made you competitive, but a bronze is a bronze. I'm sure you're happy with the money and you're already plotting again for next year. And maybe another name change. Or are you going to draft Burrow and Lamb early just so you can keep it? Can I manage to do talking about a final justice without coming across as either condescending or overly complimentary? Probably not. Going to fall flat on my face. I'd love to say that this was the final of all finals, and it's always great when your person comes out and just scores a ton. I mean, I did my best, but as you can see, I was not the number 1 in the week, and had I had another opponent, I might have lost this one, but it was really down to a few key matchups, and unfortunately for Jake, his running backs really, really let him down. Mixon had a phenomenal year, but not a phenomenal playoff run. He kind of killed you the last few weeks. Now, St. Brown was St. Brown. He was doing the stuff he's been pretty much doing all year. But you really, really, really just needed a couple more guys or a little bit more consistency, and you didn't get it. I mean, Gibbs also, he had the running back 2 performance of the week. Mahomes actually, I mean, you'd think 27 would normally put you in the spot to be a top 5. He was not, but I mean, 27 Mahomes, I'm taking it every day. You really just needed some of these guys who've been consistent for you all year to do something, and they didn't. But if we look at the bench, Ladd McConkey would have been huge for you. Devontae Smith would have been huge for you. Tampa Bay. I hate to do it. If you want to do the math and try and figure out if you would have won, you would have. Then you can go ahead and do it. But I don't want to rub it in, but you would have. So, I mean, again, you're a math teacher. You can do the math and figure it out. Ultimately, sorry, buddy. I mean, I had some points on the bench, if that makes you feel better. But you can always say ifs and buts, but realistically, you went with the guys who had helped you out all year. I'm not so sure I would have confidently done it anyway. Also, remember, it was Christmas, so the schedules were all messed up. You had to make some of these decisions early before you knew the health. And silver is not that bad considering you also got the league final. For me, I'm kind of lucky how this went out. Connor getting hurt, I thought I was done. James Cook underperforming, I thought I was done. My defense, I mean, I almost cracked the top 5, but not quite. My tight end almost cracked the top 5, but not quite. Weirdly enough, I had a quarterback 4 performance in Daniels. That's not weird. And Digger, the kicker, came out with the performance of the year. So when the Chargers and New England played, I was pretty happy. I kind of jumped ahead. The predicteds changed. And it was all downhill from there from Jake. So I'll take it. I'm not going to go ahead and say this is the best team or I thought I had the best team, but I won when it mattered. And hey, I'm totally comfortable cashing the check. Jake, we see here the team that you ended up deciding to represent you, but let's see the team you drafted. Now, if we take a look, your MVPs or your heroes, I had as Detroit. I mean, your top 4 picks are still pretty great. St. Brown ends up as the wide receiver 3 on the year. Gibbs, the running back 2. Mahomes, the quarterback 11. Mixon does crack. He was our running back 12, although I think the issue with you, and obviously you had a great regular season, so I'm just being nitpicky. Not everyone peaked at the same time. I mean, Gibbs was pretty consistent, but had a better end because Monty got hurt. Mixon was great at the beginning, real crap for you at the end. Mahomes was super inconsistent at the beginning of the year, but then had a actually great last couple weeks, surprisingly. Kincaid has to be your biggest bust, not because it really cost you that much. It's a 6th round pick and it was a tight end. And as we can see, you replaced him well with TJ. But when you name a guy, you name your team after a guy, you kind of just want him to get it together. I hope you maybe follow him. I'm sure you do somewhere. Maybe leave him a comment next time. Heard your hockey story. It just didn't work out for you in football. But maybe you can send him a note and tell him to get his crap together and you can do it again next year. You had some issues with injuries or even Swift with inconsistent plays, so you dropped them because you are a pretty active manager. But I wouldn't go ahead and say that cost you too much. Charbonnet was a great pickup at times. Ladd McConkey obviously would have helped you out in the last week and was a great pickup. He actually was the wide receiver 12 on the year, but Smith-Njigba, a great pickup. He ended up as well in the top 10. He was the 10th rated receiver on the year. So your team was stacked in a lot of ways. I think as you notice, though, not all the consistency, or it puts you in that spot of who do you start and when. And unfortunately, that did kind of pile up. But let's be honest, we're being super picky. You were the regular season champion, silver medalist. You're playing with house money. What more could you ask for? Taking a look at my team, it's funny. As you all know, I'm in several leagues. I don't know if this was I ever thought this was my best team, but weirdly enough, I always liked this team the most. And that might just be, though, I didn't like how I drafted them, but I liked the way that we drafted them. And if you remember, there was a little bit of a Bangkok crew here, and that was by far my most fun draft this year. So maybe that's why I was partial, but I felt my crew was very inconsistent all year. But when I hit it, I hit it. When I didn't, I really didn't. Jaden Daniels, I think, was my steal. I had him pretty late. And I think my quarterbacks in general, I was happy. And weirdly enough, I didn't start Daniels as much as I probably should have. I liked Love when he was in, and there was many weeks he outperformed him. It's just Daniels had the way higher ceiling. Nico Collins being hurt all year really sucked for me, and that's why I was kind of riding the wave until the end there. I remember I did just sneak into the playoffs, and then I kind of made my run, although I did still have a shot at the top spot going to the last week. That's a whole other story. Connor was up and down. I mean, my running backs were really funny. Connor was 11, Cook was 8, but week by week, sometimes they would be phenomenal. Sometimes they'd go in the dust. Addison was a great late addition. My bust, my villain, Tyreek Hill. I hated him when I drafted him. I didn't think he'd have a good year. I don't know why I pulled the trigger. I mean, just think, I could have had Chase. We all could have had Chase. But anyway, I made the moves I needed to make. My defenses were almost always one of the best. I did pick up Laporta, so thank you for dropping him. He did end up as the tight end 7. And like I said, my quarterback was a quarterback 5. I think I said Daniels was good. I don't think I said how good. So you can't complain, though. Wouldn't change a thing, obviously, because I liked the end result, and it was a fun process. So, hey, that's half the battle. That's it. Another year come and gone. I already can't wait till next year's draft. Oh, in the meantime, there should be another video similar to last year. I want to do a full recap. That's the last one for this particular league. I'll do one for just kind of fantasy football in general and hopefully get that out right away because life's pretty busy right now, and if I don't do it right away, who knows when it'll come out. So let's see how it goes. Plus, there's the playoff stuff and all that mess. But all this to say, let's keep hoping we got at least 10 strong. I'm going to be getting in touch with a few people. If I don't get in touch with you, it means, unfortunately, you didn't win money, but also you don't owe me money, so thank you for that. For those who owe me money, I'll be getting in touch. For those who I owe money, I will be getting in touch. Other than that, I know I see a lot of you coming and going at times, different pools, maybe even Madness, but if I don't see you at that point in time, or if I don't see you physically, I'm already looking forward to the Zoom call and all the correspondence in August. Can't wait to draft again, but thanks so much, folks. Been a great year.